Hi, I'm Chris Santacroce, and I want to talk to you a little bit about the philosophy of paragliding. You will notice over the years that anyone can paraglide, and for that matter, anyone can teach anyone to paraglide. One of the greater questions is, will a paraglider pilot end up with what they need to be a long-term pilot? Will they be in the sport over the decades and enjoy it over time? So my suggestion is, when you hear people talking about the subtlety, about the nuance of paragliding, particularly decision-making, risk management, things that aren't just your average lift here, pull there, how far did you go, then listen. Listen very closely when you hear people speak about the philosophy of paragliding. And my suggestion is that you will notice that all things are cyclical, including you as a pilot and your experience in paragliding, and then also things like equipment, technology, and the nature of the sport in general. So this is very interesting stuff to talk about, and we'll start off with the pilot. Any successful long-term pilot will tell you that when they look at their paragliding gear sitting in the house or in the garage, that they have a very sort of warm and fuzzy feeling about the paraglider, that the idea of paragliding is still excites them, and it's with no caveats, and they have nothing but a good feeling about paragliding and the equipment. This is a very important thing to protect over the long term, and it can happen quite easily that you can have a scary experience or a bad experience, and then when you look at that paraglider sitting there, you'll walk right past it and you'll go do something else. So to that end, we all need to protect our paragliding, that it stays enjoyable over the long term. And to that end, it's important to check out where you are in your sort of overall flying mindset at the moment. So we will all go from sort of very high on paragliding, nothing can stop us, it's pure joy, funnest, best thing we've ever done. And then we will always be given a little correction, and that can be in the form of a close call. Usually it comes in the form of one or two close calls, a near miss, a miscalculation, and then all of a sudden you find yourself on the backside of the curve. You're just not as excited about it. Perhaps you're a little more skeptical about conditions, you're a little bit more reserved in your technique, you're kind of on the backside of the curve. And then you will notice that as time goes on, you start to find yourself enjoying it more. You feel a little bit more sort of bulletproof, you feel like expanding your horizons a little bit more, and guess what? You're ready for a little correction. So a surprise deflation, a blown launch, a bad landing, a little band-aid, could be anything, but the sport will deal you those ups and downs, and I think any pilot who's been around for any number of years will tell you that's the case. So put a study on that and try to ask yourself on a daily basis, where am I along the curve? And is it possible that I can give myself a slight correction before the elements, the universe, whatever you want to call it, before the element gets dealt to you? Food for thought. When it comes to the paragliding world in general, it also ebbs and flows in the very same way. So a classic anecdotal paradigm is your average beginner glider / intermediate glider, B category. It will happen that in the industry, the fashion is to make gliders that are at the top of the category, and the community and the average paragliding consumer will want to purchase the best performing B glider they can get. The same is true for Cs. And what will happen? Well, a couple hundred of them will get out there in the world, and a few people will have some scares, people who maybe shouldn't have been on a B glider. And then the design brief for the paragliders will change. And in the subsequent years, they'll make gliders that are just good for any pilot who wants to fly a B. Qualified or unqualified, they want the glider, above all, to be a guardian angel, and they're willing to give up some performance to make it happen. So it would be smart for the average pilot to put a study on the overall paragliding manufacturing trend and see where it's headed and where it is at that moment. And so Then you can purchase more appropriately, and you can also make decisions more appropriately, and you can manage your risk. Again, you're trying to figure out where you fit on the curve. Is your glider at the top of the category or the bottom of the category? And where should you be? What's more appropriate for you at your time and place in the sport? So again, with the cycles, this will probably happen in terms of durability of equipment. Super lightweight equipment comes along, everyone's starry-eyed about how many grams they've saved, and then you find out that it's not durable, that it needs to be replaced after a couple of years, and so the market will shift, and the sell will be that it's lightweight but robust. And this happens, and you may even notice this sort of paradigm in your flying day, that you have moments where you're on it, and then after you've been flying for a couple hours, then you find yourself on the back side of the curve and you're just in a different category. By and large, all we're trying to do is to remain present, to remain in the moment, to take note of where we are, and ultimately, because we're navigating in 3 dimensions and there's no pause button because we're flying, then this is all in an effort to manage our risk and to keep us out of harm's way, to keep us smiling at the end of the day, and to make sure that in 10 years and 20 years we're still in the sport. Every professional pilot knows about the ebbs and flows of the paragliding world, because we'll go from operating without any incident at all with our students or our tandem passengers to being a little bit callous, perhaps a little bit aggressive, and then fairly predictably will be dealt a correction. So if I have too much confidence in my teaching, then I might send a student in stronger conditions than they should be flying in, or I might send a student to call the landing on their own timing, and I'll be punished for that. You know, the landing won't be perfect, or the student might end up flying in some conditions that are really only good for intermediate pilots, or these things happen. And as an instructor, I have to take those little hints and adjust my program so that it doesn't result in anything more severe. Any tandem pilot who's ever flown in a no-wind environment, who has to do the technical landings at altitude particularly, will tell you that you can do a few hundred in a row and not have any problems. But at a certain point you start thinking, I've got this, this is no problem, what could possibly go wrong? And that's exactly when you fall over on the landing, or you know, you have a landing that's just a little more firm than the rest, and you maybe even blow a launch. Could happen. And these are the things that happen. I think the important point is that pilots are rarely surprised when a bad thing happens. More aptly, and especially when they have a chance to reflect, they will find out a couple things. One, they will find out that they were dealt a couple of warnings. A couple of things happened, a little miss here, a little miss there, mismanagement of situation, and those were the hints. And then they'll also find that something about the pilot on that day and at that moment wasn't tip-top, you know. So for me, a distraction in my personal life, or it could be a level of exhaustion, it could be dehydration, it could be any number of things. When those creep in and then you've already been dealt the 2 warnings, for me, that's when it happens. And I haven't had a correction in my solo flying recently, although I haven't been pushing the bleeding edge of things either, and that means one thing and one thing only, that I am due a correction. And so I would do well to recognize that I might not be super current in some areas, you know, cross-country hot gliders, maneuvers over the ground, it could be low-level flying, you name it. I'm much more current on tandems with people in the chair, much more current on teaching, probably current on kiting, but all those other areas are not familiar for me right now. And so I'm doing a constant mental inventory of where I'm strong and where I'm not, and I'm also reminded of the aviation paradigm where the thing that you are worried about, the area that you think could cause you some trouble, is not actually the area where you're going to find trouble. It's going to be where you least expect it. And that's just a reminder for everyone to be on guard.